Um, when I read this last week, I keep having to up the numbers every time I read this. Over 13,000 people killed, and almost 50% are children, and an estimated 1.4 million Palestinians internally displaced in the past 3 weeks. And we are deeply troubled with what we are able to do here. The U.S. government is providing military and financial support to Israel to assist in carrying out these shocking and public acts of genocide, including the deadly bombings of the Palestinian refugee camps. And as a coalition, we do not endorse actions that result in civilian suffering and death in Palestine or in Israel. We stand by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and by the necessity for peaceful resolution. The current situation in Palestine is unacceptable, and we stand against any form of violence against innocent civilians. The US-backed Israeli war to kill, punish, and dislocate all of the Palestinians must end immediately. We hope for peace and a coexistence, and a call for the following: an immediate ceasefire and release of hostages. 3, an end to the Israeli blockades of humanitarian aid, food, water, electricity, medical supplies, and fuel into Palestine. 4, a comprehensive solution to this 75-year-old conflict that honors and respects Palestinian rights. And 5, a rejection by Congress of the Biden administration's proposed $14.3 billion in additional aid to help Israel to continue carrying out its ethnic cleansing and human rights crimes against the Palestinian people. This was signed on November 7th, and as I mentioned, the numbers keep growing every day. And we can do something here as faculty, as students are engaged in this collective dialogue. And one small ask is to sign. We're going to drop the signature in the URL. We'll also give you a way here, those of you in the space, on how to sign in, how to sign up. This will be presented at the next governing board meeting in downtown Martinez. And before I introduce our guest speaker, which I'm really excited about, we're going to change the tone on the practices that we can do here locally that we're engaged in. And when we say abolition, when we say abolishing and building new worlds, how do we act in those spaces? How do we do? We just came from our theory class. The theory without the action is nothing. So now we're thinking deeply about how we can engage here and build opportunities at DVC for those folks who have been cast out. So I will now introduce our guest speaker, who's working to abolish prisons, whether here, whether the largest open-air prison on the planet, whether to change things on the largest incarcerator in the world, the United States of America. We can do it. And Shani Shay, who's a graduate of UC Berkeley. She earned her bachelor's degree in African American Studies and a minor in education in 2022. She's the director and the founder of Incarceration to College and Pathways to College. She uses Black feminist pedagogies to increase the educational aspirations of in-custody and marginalized youth. And I'll just add, I met Shani doing this remarkable work when I was on sabbatical, really focusing and doing my research on abolition and those practices and trying to build a program here at DVC. And she's doing the work just nearby where we're housing, incarcerating our youth, just a couple miles away from here in Martinez. We're not that far off. I have some of those students in my classes, and they're doing the work to trying to build a different world, thinking from within the places they were confined. And I just want to pause there to bring attention, and this is where I touch base with Shani and say, you got to come. You got to come and speak about what you're doing, because you're doing it and you're dedicating your life to this. So she's an exemplar of the possibilities of abolition. It's not some fantasy. It is something that we can build a new world that is more equitable for us all. In addition, Shani uses her program to provide UC Berkeley students with hands-on fieldwork experience. She served as the advocacy co-chair for the Berkeley Underground Scholars from 2019 to 2022 at UC Berkeley, and now serves on the board of the Underground Scholars Initiative. She forwards her educational access and systemic change by serving as chair of the Alameda County Education Subcommittee. Shani is a 2021 Elder Freeman Policy Fellow, and her advocacy work at the state capitol has helped to pass bills such as ACA 3, which pushes to amend the Constitution to stop indentured servitude. This is now. Shani also serves as the president of the Black Underground Scholars to recruit, retain, and advocate for Black previously incarcerated students in the UC system. She's a 2021 Fireball Scholar. Her research focuses on effective teaching methods for incarcerated and marginalized youth. She received the 2020 California Women in Leadership Award and the 2022 Mather Good Citizen Award, and several honors from the Office of Nancy Skinner. Shani will earn her master's in education next year, 2024, from Harvard University. She hopes to create a space where educational practices meet the liberatory needs of society. So let's give a warm, energetic welcome to Shani Shay.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start and just say, number one, if we could all take a collective breath, maybe recenter ourselves. I'm definitely looking forward to being here with you all. And so I'm going to start us off. If everybody could take in a deep breath and let it out. We're going to do this 2 more times. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Let it out. And for this last breath, if you could take the deepest breath that you've taken all day. And go ahead and let it out. I'm very honored to be here with you all today. And even thinking of Palestine, thinking of what just was talked about, I feel actually even more honored to be in this space. And I'm doing my best to really carry this work and to express myself in a kind of meaningful way that's also effective and provide some tools to people in the room and also people that are on Zoom. Thank you for being here. Do I have control? You have control. May we go to the next slide? Thank you. So this kind of stuff was already said about me. I am previously incarcerated. I started going to jail when I was about 18 years old. I spent the majority of my adult life on felony probation. Yes, I earned my bachelor's degree at Berkeley in African American Studies. One of the things about learning African American Studies for me was that it really forwarded who I was as a human being. And furthermore, a lot of the things that I intuitively knew how to do already to lead my community, it actually provided me with the research background, right? And the tools and the methods that people wanted to hear in the academic world. But I say that because as a Black woman, what I have found time and time again is that my intuition is actually what leads me the best, right? And it's actually what provides me with most of the skills that have allowed me to do really meaningful work and allowed me to work with other people and support other people who do really meaningful work also. I started my research as a Firebaugh scholar, and what I looked at is effective teaching methods. I know that in the world today, we have tons of theories, tons of ideas, tons of emotions and responses, but a lot of times we need to share these practices with other people. So what I was really curious about is, how do I look at what I'm doing in the Incarceration to College program? How do I identify what's possibly working and not working? And then how do I teach other people to do that? So through Firebaugh, I surveyed 6 youth that were incarcerated in the juvenile hall. I actually surveyed multiple youth, but those were the youth for whom I was able to publish with. And we found that the youth experienced more love in the classroom when we use Black feminist pedagogies. And sometimes people go, does it really matter? What difference does love make? But as I go through some of the slides after this, we're going to see how many people are actually affected by hopelessness and lack of love, right? And what that really does for people's ability to liberate themselves. So really, when I'm talking, it is really about abolition in the true sense of being able to really abolish systems continuously. One of the things that we come across a lot of times is a desire to want to abolish things once, right? And as if, and I always say this, people will say, well, how is this type of system sustainable? How is cultural relevancy sustainable? How is loving and caring and treating people like humans sustainable? Very rarely do people say, how are these oppressive systems so sustainable? And the reason that I ask that is because it's very important that we start to acknowledge that oppression is a working tool. It's not something that only one time oppressed a group of people. It's something that is continuously working, right? And so we'll talk about some of those tools today, and also talk about why education, and this is a known fact, right? Not just in spaces where we're doing social justice, in oppressive spaces also. People know that education is actually either the tool for liberation or oppression, right? That's why there are millions of people who don't have access to education. And that's why our education is, is what I would just say made into the package that it's made into, because it does have a really, really big impact. So for me, when I was doing my research, I was very, very curious about how do we use Black feminist pedagogies? As a Black woman, as someone that was previously incarcerated who experienced their own self-liberation, I actually internally knew. I knew there were some things that I had experienced that other people might benefit from. But once again, African-American studies in UC Berkeley and my research gave me the ability to kind of share those things in a more methodological manner. And today I'm studying at Harvard University to obtain my master's in education. What I would tell you is that every elite university is the same. However, they have access to all the JSTOR, right? To all the novels, to all of this information. And once again, right, this is a part of why education is a liberatory thing, right? And so I really, really am grateful for the education that I've had access to, but I'm also really grateful for just trusting in my own self, trusting in my heart, and doing what I love. And before we get even deeper into this, as Albert kind of mentioned, there's so much around you that you already see. There are things inside of each one of us where we already know because they're close to our heart. A lot of times we have this idea of looking at people in a deficit manner and saying, I'm going to take what I have and go into someone else's community and provide what they don't have. But we're not closest to that community, right? A lot of times we're trying to figure out and spend so much time, how can we be relevant? When reality is that all communities have a place where there's a deficit. Every deficit does not look the same. And the people that you are closest to, you're very often going to be better at impacting. And so I say that really to encourage people to be mindful that this idea of I'm going to go into the juvenile hall, I'm going to go into a less resourced or marginalized or oppressed community, and I'm going to provide what they do not have. I really encourage us to look at our own communities and look at what deficit is it to oppress someone else, right? What deficit in a community is it that I'm willing to go and take someone else's life so that I can perpetuate wealth in my own community? There is a deficit there, right? It might be a moral deficit, it might be a humanity deficit, but there are also deficits where we can go, oh, okay, you know what? I actually don't have to go to another community, try and embed myself and then leave this community. What I can do is work within my own community and actually create those changes there. And I would venture to say that that might be even more impactful. So just before we start and we're thinking about abolition, abolition does not only happen in a jail cell. It does not only happen on a policy floor. It actually happens in the minds, in the hearts of the people that we are in community with every single day. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm going to go over some numbers, kind of just talk about, why abolition. If anyone is not convinced, that's all right. That's fine. A lot of us think of reform. And also, like I said, a lot of times we're looking at, is it possible? You know what I'm saying? Like, are we going to really be able to provide abolition? But once again, when that thought enters your mind, I just want you to consider, how possible is it to continue living under these type of circumstances? And really, I would say it's getting impossible, right? I think we see it every day in our communities, how much more impossible it's getting. So approximately 1.8 million people are incarcerated in the US right now. A really interesting fact about the US is that we've always incarcerated the most people from the time of indentured servitude, right? When there was chattel slavery, the US practiced the most slavery, and nothing has changed. And it's very important that we acknowledge that incarceration chattel slavery is a big part of our economic system. So a lot of times when we hear about incarceration, we hear about it on the nose of, oh my goodness, this is costing us so much money. It's costing taxpayers so much money. Anytime you hear that something is costing taxpayers money, it's because someone's being paid for that, right? It's because there's actually a job. And so there's this really exciting thing. Well, I don't know if it's exciting, but for me, it's how my mind works, called disaster capitalism, right? And so disaster capitalism is when we actually create a disaster, and then now we have to create something to fix that disaster. So when you look at incarceration and mass incarceration, I want you to think about how much of a disaster does that create in communities? Children of incarcerated parents are 6 times more likely to go to jail. Children of parents that are on felony probation are 80 times more likely to live in poverty, right? How many more disasters is that exacerbating on our community? And so what do? We create systems around these disasters with this idea that we're going to come in and provide a deficit, as opposed to really looking at why are we creating systems that create disasters? The answer is because it's extremely profitable, right? If any of you know that a youth, it costs almost $100,000 to incarcerate a youth every year, right? It costs almost $100,000 to incarcerate a woman every year. And then what does it cost then when her child does not have any childcare? Or when they're now being affected by toxic stress, right? Living in toxic stress. Youth that live in inner cities, youth that are funneled into the incarceration system, very oftentimes are experiencing the same levels of toxic stress that people experience when they're living in war-torn areas. This is very important, right? Because that's a lifetime of disaster. Within 5 years of release, 70% of people that are incarcerated are likely to be arrested. We also have the highest recidivism rate. So really looking at this, when I think of the US, I always think about the things that we can do so well, like McDonald's. You know what I'm saying? Like all these things that somehow we managed to get the same Safeway lot in every state around the world, no matter where you go. And it's like, oh my gosh, it looks like Safeway, McDonald's, US Bank, Wells Fargo, it's everywhere. We managed to do that, but somehow we haven't really been able to figure out how is it that we're going to stop recidivism? How are we going to stop arresting people? So I say that in the words of Duncan Andrade, most things are working just the way that they're supposed to work. This is by design, right? Yes, that can be daunting, but it's also much more empowering to understand that the system of incarceration is by design. The American Psychological Association reports that 64% of incarcerated people report mental health issues, and isolation, like solitary confinement, is associated with a 26% increased risk of premature death, right? The fact that we still use solitary confinement is something we would not even do to an animal, right? We treat human beings ways that we wouldn't treat animals. So I want you all to have these numbers so you can just kind of understand this is why abolition. And even if you're sitting and going, well, someone committed a crime, they don't deserve to be free. Why did they do that? This is their punishment. I also just want you to think about how does that express itself in your community? So maybe you do truly believe that people need punishment and you are on the side of people have to pay for their crimes. Okay, why are you paying for their crimes? Why are we all now having to deal with the fact that the system that we place other human beings in is actually making more harm? And then I am a previously incarcerated person, earn lower wages, have weaker social networks, more self-apathy, and experience less upward economic mobility. Right? Recently, I was doing a narrative analysis, right? And so we're creating a project based upon interviews that we did. And I interviewed a Black male who had done 18 years of his life in and out of jail. He's now at UC Berkeley. And we created a board game. It's actually one of my favorite things I've created. And on the board, there was 40 spaces. And out of the 40 spaces, you roll the dice, you get a different response. Every space that you go, the goal is that you end up getting into an elite university. So 28 of those spaces for a Black male are negative things. 15 of those spaces on the board, this board of life, will send this person to life in prison without parole, right? And so when you look at it this way and you start to really understand that all we have is chances in life. right? Opportunities, what's going to come our way? What are we provided by our social network? What are we provided by education? It becomes really important to go, oh my gosh, right? Like this, it is a game, right? That we get to play in my class at Harvard and I get to play at professional developments. But the flip side is that it's actually somebody's life. It's actually a life, it's an experience that a lot of people are going to experience. And the way that our system is set up, that each way you identify it actually changes your places on the board. So just thinking about why abolition, right? Maybe so that the board does look equitable, right? Maybe so that there is actually a through line for where people start at to where they want to get to. Next slide is going to go over youth statistics. As I work with youth, very important for me. So the total number of youth in residential placement in 2019 was 36,479. This is not just youth that are incarcerated in juvenile facilities. This includes group home, rehabilitation spaces, anywhere outside of their home. One of the most interesting things about juvenile incarceration is this, is that when youth are incarcerated, their parents lose the rights to them. They become wards of the court. So now the state becomes their parent. And the state is actually the person that says where they can live, what access to resources they have, where they're going to end up. And essentially, for me, not only is it problematic, but once again, right? So now we're looking at what is the state doing? And then what is actually the purpose of taking this child out of their home? And then what are the effects? And so what we know is that youth also have extremely high recidivism rates. Most youth are rearrested. So I'm saying this to you because I just want you to understand that the system doesn't work. That's like the main point of all of this. If the idea is that you send someone to jail and that they no longer are going to go to jail, it's not working. If this was anything else, we would not continue. So then you must ask yourself, what is the system supposed to do? If this is what it's doing and it's continued to do, and we've never seen it do anything else, someone is lying to you. If they're saying that the reason that we build prisons and jails and put people in jail is because we want to rehabilitate them, it's obvious that it does not work. 60% of incarcerated youth have IEPs or identify as disabled. I have DSP. I have PTSD 5 actually from being in jail, right? When I went to UC Berkeley, I got extra resources, right? Because of the mental health that I experienced. We are putting youth inside of facilities. We are putting them sometimes inside of solitary confinement, youth that we know have disabilities, and we are literally punishing them based upon the fact that they have a disability. Here's the bigger kicker. Most of the reasons that youth are getting kicked out of their classrooms and getting exposed to the school to prison pipeline is actually directly related to their IEP. So a youth that has trouble because maybe they might have trouble focusing. So now they're sitting in class and they're having trouble focusing. We're not even going to talk about the content of the curriculum, the fact that there probably is no UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, which doesn't incorporate the jaggedness principle. And now this youth no longer wants to focus, but it's in their IEP. And the school, California, receives $20 billion for disabled students for IDEA. And now that same student is getting kicked out of class and exposed to the school to prison pipeline. Right? So once again, that actually works for mass incarceration. What it doesn't work is for liberating students through education. It doesn't even work, excuse me, for the ostensible goal of what education is supposed to do in this country, right? Incarceration for youth increases the risk of death, suicide, physical and sexual violence. What is really, really traumatic, excuse me, is the amount of youth that actually do get sexually abused while incarcerated, right? The statistics are staggering. So once again, just really understanding that what we're doing is not helping. And then furthermore, we already know the majority of the youth that we're interacting with are already experiencing high level of ACEs. 100% of youth say that they have experienced a negative traumatic experience. Over 70% of youth have experienced 3 or more traumatic experiences in their childhood. What is incarceration? Is it that positive experience that's going to change the trajectory? Or is it actually the 4th negative experience on their ACEs? Right? So really looking at that. On average, youth experience a loss in education and skill during incarceration about 2 years. Right? Because of the way that education is given in carceral spaces. Incarcerated youth have a 76% chance of being rearrested. And once again, United States leads the way in incarcerating youth. Right? Which only really funnels it into continuously leading the way into incarcerating the most adults. Excuse me. The school to prison pipeline refers to a set of policies. I mentioned this a little earlier, teacher behavior, schoolings, and over-policing that funnels youth into students. Youth that have a security officer in their school are 11 times more likely to be arrested. So once again, what is it working for? What is the point? When Oakland said we're going to bring police into the school, it actually probably directly relates to the fact that more Black males are suspended and arrested in Alameda County. It doesn't relate to any level of safety. It doesn't relate to any level of resources. So being really mindful, right, that there are policies, there are things you can look at. And I say that because every one of us in this class is going to do what we want to do. We're going to do something different. Some of us are going to be in the healthcare field. Some of us are going to create our own businesses. Some of us are going to be doing policy. Some of us will be educators. The idea is that you understand that this is an entire system embedded every day in the culture that we live in, and that you do have impact no matter what it is you choose to do, right? And what you can really put in your armor and put in your toolkit is the facts. Nobody can debate this. This is the truth. These are the true statistics, and this is actually what happens to youth and adults who are incarcerated. Very, very few of us make it. The fact that I'm standing here today, going to graduate from Harvard in less than 6 months, and I'm a previously incarcerated Black woman, there's not very many of me, right? I went to UC Berkeley with 40,000 students. There's less than 150 underground scholars. And not even all of us are previously incarcerated. So being really mindful of what that really says about, also about the, and there's nothing wrong with it. Yes, DEI, yes, you know, having all these like funds and things for us. But the other part is like, there has to be something on the ground that is actually providing the scaffolding necessary to get people where they deserve to go and where they deserve to have access to. Thank you all for listening. I hope I'm not like too incited. So of course I'm not just gonna leave you with all the problems. I would never do that. So education as a tool. So this is something that I've recently started to like really investigate. It's really interesting for me. The World Bank and multiple NGOs use education as a tool to set up democratic institutions all the world. So the World Bank, right, is responsible for much of the philanthropic work and the educational systems being set up throughout the actual entire world, right? And they know, there's a lot of studies that they do, right, that talk about democracy as a way, the way that what education should do. It should create a system where students can think for themselves, critically think, right? But what we have found time and time again is that actually what the systems do is nullify, right? And make students be a little, I don't want to say less, just less pushback, less resistance, right? Because also the goal of the World Bank and multiple NGOs is to promote democracy. The reason that I'm talking about this is because if the World Bank knows that education is used as a tool to set up political structures, then I guarantee you that the people that are setting up educational structures right here in America know that education is used as a tool to set up our political culture. So we just talked about what the political culture was, right? We just talked about what it meant, what mass incarceration was. So I just want you to start to think, okay, so what does that mean about the way we're using education in this country? In a paper studying the effects of Western pedagogies dispersed throughout the World Bank, it was found that the effects of education support a market system which benefits the Western economy. So that means that as we are developing students here and throughout the world, we are developing students who are going to perpetuate the very same system that I was just talking about in the last two slides. I'm just going to read these quotes. All the statements stress the perceived significance of the relationship between education and politics. Specifically, that education has the potential to contribute significantly towards the democratization process. After all, education's a political and moral activity, and by its very nature embodies our cultures and ideologies. Practices in periphery schools so as to produce individuals whose mindsets would be compatible with political conditions. I've referenced it here, so you all are more than welcome to have these slides too. And please, I would say that for me was one of the most powerful papers that I read. Why? Because I really want you all to start to consider, what is our education system doing? Not only for those of us that end up in the school to prison pipeline, but for those of us that don't. For those of us that develop lesson plans and curriculum, right? When we play that game, the idea is that the teacher, the administrator can start to understand, oh, this is what my experience is for my students who come in as a first generation student. So now you can kind of develop the certainty, the scaffolding, the resources that are actually needed for students to be successful, right? But it's very difficult for us to understand that if we don't really see how education as a tool. You think about it as educators. You come into the classroom with your ideas, with what you want to teach, and where you want your students to go. Very often, those things are dictated by what we want our political economy to look like. May we go to the next slide. So, self-quiz, nobody has to answer this question. What is the political culture of your community, your state, and this country, right? And interestingly enough, those things don't always align, but just consider. What do we deal with here in California, right? We just had the APEC conference, the streets got cleaned up, you could say, right? What is a political culture? What does that say? What's important to us, right? How are we treating each other? A friend of mine, her parents have been here for 22 years, actually our associate director, and she's also a close friend of mine. 22 years, I just had a conversation with her. She was like, the only way that I could get my parents documented is if we say that I've been abusing them and they've been here for 22 years and they paid all these taxes and they've been contributing, right? What does that say? What's our political culture, right? What do these things really mean? And how does education support that political culture? And so this is where education and abolition become very, very important. Because oftentimes we're not taking advantage of the educational space. It doesn't mean that we're per se doing something wrong, but you have to understand that if you're in a classroom and what you're teaching, like right now, this is the educational space. And so to take advantage of this, I'm going to teach liberation. I'm going to teach abolition. So this is what we have to do. And this is up to you how you choose to believe it. But for me, I know that I live in a culture that wants to incarcerate me and my Black brothers and sisters. And they want to do it for profit, and they want to do it at all costs, and that nobody who looks like me matters. And that if they're a male, they matter way less. And that if they're a male, they shouldn't act a certain way, and they need to be subservient, and they need to be scared. You don't have to believe that, but I believe that. That's when I answer that first question, that's how I look at it, right? So I look at, what does Richmond do to young Black boys? I know I'm in a juvenile hall, they incarcerate them, right? How does Contra Costa act? What are the behaviors? I just watched a youth who was in juvenile hall for 3 years, from 15 to 18, completely changed, get sentenced to adult court. He can go to jail for the rest of his life, right? So this is how, okay, so I know this is what I believe. So now I take that belief that I have, and it's okay for me to have, I'm allowed to have it based upon the facts that I've developed, or not I've developed, but that I've found and that I'm sharing. How does education support that political culture? So now when I go into the classroom, there are certain tools that I use. There's certain things that I teach because I understand what education is used for. And the reason that I preface with that is because I want you all to think about that. What is education being used for? And although oftentimes we would like to pretend as education is being used for this and for that, we just read the statistics. So we know what it's being used for, right? And so I just offer you all I just really would encourage you to really think about, okay, what's going on in my society? And education is one of the most powerful tools that we have, right? Kids spend like 40 hours a week in the classroom. My kids go to school like 8 hours a day. It's like their second home, right? So what can be taught in those spaces? And we don't have enough time to go over like different types of schooling structures today, but I also encourage you all really to look at different types of schooling structures. Independent schools, schools that have stepped outside of the traditional educational norm, actually because they recognized that the education was being used to disenfranchise and to oppress people, right? On wide scales. So just, yeah, I'll give like, just, think about that. What's, those two questions, and we're gonna have questions at the end, so don't worry, you can ask me that back if you want. But yeah, what is the political culture of your community, your state, and this country? And how does education support that political culture? Feel free to jot some notes down. I'm gonna go to the next slide now. Thank you. So of course, what's education gonna do about abolition? So oftentimes, and this is in my own personal experience, but in many of the experiences of people who do the work like me in organizations, probation and carceral systems lament that education reduces recidivism. So you hear that a lot. If you go to school, you're not going to go back to jail. Well, the school per se is not the people that are arresting people. It is the carceral system. So it sounds good, but the reality is that we have a system of incarceration. Why? Because of disaster capitalism, as I stated in the beginning. It creates a lot of wealth for this country. So we have to also think outside of it. Okay, if we sent everybody to school, maybe they would stay out of jail, but actually what's going to stop this system of mass incarceration? That's why abolition is important. So they will often co-opt education initiatives to enhance carceral spaces. So what you have now is jails and prisons that allow you to earn a 4-year degree. Sometimes you have the juvenile hall, which now has to provide community college, which I totally 100% believe in. But I also don't believe that the juvenile hall should exist. So there are those things, right? And you don't have to believe what I believe, but I want you to consider to hold them, right? If we bring the resources inside of the juvenile hall, does it not make it a juvenile hall? It still is a juvenile hall. Yes, maybe it makes it a little bit better, but it still has those same traumatic effects. So being really mindful of that. Access to education does not, it does support incarcerated people and it does change lives. However, education's role is not to ameliorate or make better the carceral space. Very, very important. And I say that as someone who spends every single week, every day, training people to go into juvenile halls, into prisons, and to teach, right? And to get people into college and through college. So I'm not saying that you leave the space. Actually, the reality is that if we leave, who is going to support? Who is going to do the work? It's very important that we fill that space. The other side of it is when you were there, how are you using education? What are you going to do with education? Some of you may actually become teachers in continuation schools and juvenile hall institutions. How then do you use your curriculum to liberate students? It becomes very important because we have the access. So there's a Brofenheimer's. I'm actually doing the best I've ever done with names today, actually. Brofenheimer has this, it's kind of like sociological spheres, right? So in the middle, there's one person, and then there's like the microsystem, the exosystem, the macro system, the chronosystem, right? So basically, it's like all these different things. How do politics affect the person? How does a family affect the person? How does a community, right? What are all these different things? And so what I encourage you to think about is how, in the outer systems, it's very important, right? Those policies, those resources are very important, but they trickle down, right? All the way down to the individual. So the closer that you are to whatever you're trying to change, that's where you think about how you're going to do your impact, right? And so as educators, we're closest to the student. And actually the benefit is that we are closest to changing our social structure because that's what education does. Education is a tool for liberation and can be used effectively and can be effectively used as one if we move away from schooling and move into freedom. Also, Angela Valenzuela, I don't know if anyone's heard of her, amazing work, talks about the difference between schooling and education. Schooling, right, is what we know, is actually what's used to indoctrinate people. It's actually the opposite of education. So being mindful, okay, how am I going to not indoctrinate my students? How am I going to position them to be powerful? How am I going to position them to actually push back against me? Who wants that in the classroom? Nobody, right? Everybody wants their children to be sitting down, to listen, to follow instructions. But who does that serve? Right? And why does that serve anyone? When in reality, we're human beings and we should question what's going on around us. And as I just stated, when there's an oppressive system, there's no question about, oh my gosh, how come there's an uprising over there? What can we do to stop it? So the same mind needs to go in, how come there's an oppressive system going on over there? And what can we do to stop it? And how do I use my classroom space to create those types of people? We have come to a space, I mean, honestly, like really, it's tragic. How much we've forgotten that we're powerful, myself included. Truly, really, like anything that we want, anywhere that we want the world to look, we can have it look that way. It does require sacrifice, but don't think that the people that are practicing the things that you and I maybe you don't believe in are not sacrificing. So just be mindful. Just be mindful that you do have a lot of power. And that if you can create a whole group of students, when I started going into the juvenile hall, this is what they would say. If you can just get one student to do the right thing and go to community college or to change their life, that would be good. I'm like thinking, why? One student? It's 20 little black and brown boys in there. Why would I only get one of them? That's not good enough. And I mean that. It's not good enough. Just one of us is just not good enough. Yes, it's great, do it. But remember that this is a much bigger issue. Thank you, and now go to the next slide. Okay, so education that works for freedom. So these are two actual tools and methods. As I said, for me, I'm like super into methods, and I'm super into thinking about what can actually be done. So Black feminist pedagogies developed by the Combahee River Collective. So there's a bunch of women, Audre Lorde, Barbara Omalade, I obviously said that one wrong, Ola Mad, and a few other women actually came together while they were teaching at the Harlem School, right? And they were thinking about, okay, how do we liberate the women that we're working with? They were tasked with going to a community college and teaching English, right? And so what they noticed was that there was actually a disconnect. As them as Black women who had had similar experience, but had now who went through a formal education, there was a little bit of a disconnect. And they wanted to figure out, how can we make sure that we're reaching our students and we're actually teaching them to be strong and to be courageous and to think outside of the box. Black feminist pedagogies aim to use intellectual inclusion. There's this really cool thing that you can do in each one of your classroom. It's called the third space. Some people call it home space. Some people call it the kitchen table space, right? So in everybody's environment, there's a space with someone, maybe it's yourself, where you can just say anything you want. Doesn't matter. You're not going to get canceled. Nobody's going to record you from the back on Instagram and post you for 1 million views. And you're talking about all these, like, you know, you're talking like, no, I believe this, and no, I believe that, and we should do this, and it's okay, right? It's actually called the third space. And with Black feminist pedagogies, they believe that is actually one of the most important spaces that you can have in a classroom. It's a space where your students can start to think and push back on what's being placed in front of them, right? And I always say as a teacher, it's like a cheat code, like, yeah, go over there and talk. You know what I'm saying? Like, just go have a conversation. Come back to me when you all have decided to tell me what I've done wrong. It actually is going to help your students engage, right? It's actually going to help them come up with different ideas, outside of the box thinking. Also, Black feminist pedagogy stands on affirmation and an ethic of caring, right? And so, not going like too down the rabbit hole, but also, once again, Dr. Duncan Andrade talks about critical hope, right? And if you have an opportunity to look at the difference between critical hope and false hope, it's actually a really effective way to look about how you're being how your students experience that ethic of caring and love in the classroom, right? So looking at Black feminist pedagogies, you really want to think about just how are we pushing back? How are we using that third space? How are we affirming our students, right? And how are we allowing our own experience to be something that we're going to lean on and understanding? Doesn't mean that your experience is the only experience, but it means that you do have an experience and it is valid. And your vulnerability with your students is going to allow them to pull on their own wealth of knowledge and their own funds of knowledge. And also in spaces where we see curriculums, where we see pedagogies that actually divest from students, right? Divest from their culture, using your students' funds of knowledge is actually going to be a lot more effective, right? Identifying for your student that, I always say this to my students. I'm like, wow, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Your edges are done. Your eyelashes are on fleek. Like, you got a lot of skill. You know what I'm saying? Because I barely washed my face this morning, but it's important. That's a fund of knowledge, right? Telling your students are like, oh, you were able to manage and do this, and I probably couldn't even do it. What? All I have to do is wake up in the morning, complain to my spouse, roll over, and come teach you out a book. Right? You've had to do all these other things that you still got to deal with me. So trying to figure out how do you empower your students through those affirmations, and just once again, really leaning on that third space. It's very important that we allow people to criticize us, even for you all to criticize me. Everything that I said might not be true for you. That's all right. Right? It's going to help you to develop your own ideas, to develop a more powerful idea. And then fugitive pedagogies, which oh my gosh, I'm just going to tell you, like, this I really love. Dr. Jarvis Givens, UC Berkeley alum and also a Harvard alum, did a lot of work with Black educators in Black schools, right? And so he looked all the way back into, traditionally Black schools before Brown versus the Board of Education, and after Brown versus the Board of Education, which, if anyone doesn't know, is like where we saw desegregation. And he looked at what were Black teachers doing. So there's this really, really powerful anecdote from one of his papers. He says, I walked into the school, and when the headmaster, right, so the white headmaster would come into the Black schools, they would say, okay, you can't teach about liberation. You can't teach about freedom. You can't teach all these other things. So the Black teacher would put her book, the textbook that she was supposed to teach on the desk. But on her lap beneath would be the book that she actually taught from. Right? And so Dr. Jarvis Givens called this fugitive pedagogies. And for those of us that are professors here, we know that sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to teach them this, but I'm also going to throw that in there, right? Because we're trying to liberate our students. So fugitive pedagogies for me was very, very powerful, because once again, as an African-American studies major, as an African-American woman, it once again let me know that's why you do that. That's why you call that young Black woman beautiful when she walks in the room. That's why you give your student a hug. That's why when you're teaching about the school to prison pipeline, you just don't teach it in a deficit framework. You also teach it in like, you've been powerful enough to overcome this, or you've had to deal with this, right? So using that fugitive pedagogy means embedding liberation into your curriculum. And I will tell you, sometimes people are not going to like it, and that's okay. When I go into a juvenile hall, I've actually been told, like, okay, after you leave, we need to change your class time because the students are so rowdy and empowered. I'm thinking that's what we wanted. That's why I came in there, you know what I'm saying? Because they're feeling dehumanized. So I want to give them some life. I want to breathe some life back into them, right? So me knowing, okay, I'm in a carceral space, I need access to these students. I actually usually just say, like, that's fine, change the class time. Like, I'm okay, change the class time. I'll come in about 45 minutes later. But I also am mindful of when I come back in, okay, how do I continue to liberate my students? I'm still going to come back in. I'm still going to throw that lug in there. I'm still going to let them know how valuable they are, and actually about the very system that is around to oppress them. That's a fugitive pedagogy. And I want you guys to think about when it's being taught to you. When your professor is teaching you something that you know is not the status quo, that you know actually should not have been taught to you, but it was taught to you to empower you. Why would anyone do that? Because as educators, we are shaping society. And so we're getting to the end, so I'm just going to go to this next slide, which is actually questions. Once again, kind of a repeat, but I really, really want you all to start to think about this. What is the role of education in your community? What is the role of it in your state? And what is the role in this country? And interestingly enough, those are different levels, right? What does education mean on a national level for us, right? Elite education, state college education. Even right here in California, you can look at, like, okay, what does a community college do? What does a state college do? What do the UC universities do? What do the private universities do? Who do they let in? UC Berkeley, less than 4% Black people. I would say less than 1% of them are from the surrounding community, right? So just looking, okay, what is the role? What does it actually do? What does education do right here in Contra Costa, right? How do our schools look different when I go to Walnut Creek and then when I'm in Richmond on the Iron Triangle? What's the difference here, right? What's the role here? So that's it. We have 15 more minutes. I want to definitely open the room for y'all. Thank you so much. It's one of my favorites I've done.
All right, that was amazing. Let's give another round of applause. That was very empowering, inspiring. And now we'll open it up for questions, Q&A. I know we have some. Anything you're thinking about, even have some crafted for you to think about from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of the thanks. At the beginning of the presentation, you posed a question that was like, how are systems of oppression so sustainable? So I guess my question is like, is the long story short answer to that just profit? Like, yeah.
So I don't know if the long story short is just profit. I think the long story short is that there's a strategic, like it's strategic, and there's a lot of work and effort put into it. And I think they've been going on for a long time, but what I also think we've been brainwashed into thinking is that we do not have any power, right? And that's a really a very strong falsehood. Does it mean that like it's easy to push back against those systems? Probably not. However, the systems of oppression last so long because they haven't really gotten any resistance.
So do you think that that means that what we're currently doing means that these systems are no longer going to continue to be sustainable? Do you think we're about to enter like a post-capitalist era or whatever? Like,
I didn't mean to laugh at. I'm sorry.
No, you're all
making
good,
me
I
think
get
of
it.
like sci-fi movies, and my mom be like, "It's gonna be just like in the movie." So I think we're gonna,
like
no, I'm just thinking, but go ahead.
no, I guess like I'm trying to say that like if we are successful, if this is successful, what happens next?
Well, I don't know what happens next, but do I think we're going to go into post-capitalism? I'm not sure. I believe that we're headed towards globalism, in my opinion. I believe that most systems will start to mimic and support the American system. However, I do believe that all of the positive things that we have are like actually derivatives of people pushing back. So like even housing programs, right? School lunch, as we all know, just simple stuff like that. I definitely believe that there's enough people in this country that have experienced oppression in such an intrinsic way that are embedded in the society. We all have brothers, sisters, loved ones that are police officers in the military, right? When you look at how revolution happens, there actually has to be a break between the people that hold the line, which is our armed forces, right? It has to break away from the government. I believe the beautiful thing about this country, people don't realize it, is that if push came to shove, we would win. There are a lot of us, and I don't believe that if it came down to it and we had a mass revolution, that our armed forces would actually attack back on us. I believe too many of them are actually too closely related to us, and that's something I learned in political science. So I believe that there is. I just believe that, like I said, life is very hard, to be honest, and most of us don't think we have a lot of time to push back, but we do. Thank you for that. Thank you for those questions.
I think, sorry. Okay. I just want to thank you for your message as an aspiring teacher. I really heard that and I appreciate you. I was wondering on a public school level, you hear a lot of inclusivity and equity conversation, but what do you see them doing to combat that other than just talking about it?
Well, I would offer inclusivity and equity, and I believe actually that people need to be taught about themselves. They need to be taught that it's okay to be powerful. I believe that the average student just needs to be taught that it's actually okay to be powerful. And inclusivity is totally fine. I think there's often a misnomer. It's like Malcolm X said, like the oppressor is very scared that the chickens will come home to roost. But what I have found in my own experience, that most people who want freedom. They're not actually looking to further oppress. They're just actually looking for freedom. So being really mindful to not get caught up in that type of narrative, and that I have yet to see any group that was truly fighting for freedom practice exclusion, just truly. So I don't know if that answered the question. You know what I'm saying, in terms of like combating inclusivity and equity.
Well, I would say that I don't think they are talking about it in public schools, but I don't know if they're actually, what tools are they implementing? I love the method that you shared, and I'm wondering, do they know about these? Are they trying to put it in curriculum?
I think cultural relevant pedagogy, but I also think it's very important to acknowledge, I just went through this with my professor actually, that anytime that something is co-opted by the bigger institutions, be very mindful of what's actually going on. I believe there is, in my opinion, that there is a, agenda to use things like Black feminist pedagogies, liberatory pedagogies, to once again nullify people and to make them very weak. People need to be able to feel powerful, or else you can, it's kind of like wrapping everything in a different, in a different colored bow and saying, oh, don't worry, this is good for you. But when you still have the same outcome in society, we have to be mindful of that, right? We have to look at what's going on in our world, what's going on around us. And so does that really align with a Black feminist pedagogy? It doesn't. And so, but these things are actually in schools. I mean, I do actually staff developments for people. Thank you for that.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. And in your views, incarceration is flawed here in the United States. Am I right?
Did you say flawed?
Yes.
Yes.
And is there a way that incarceration might be beneficial for society here, or how can we transform that into like a concrete way or a plan that maybe other countries could follow?
I truly believe that incarceration begets more violence for many different reasons. One, because most of the time when people are incarcerated, they actually don't have to deal with the harm that they've done. So for instance, if you go and kill someone, right? You just go to jail for a certain amount of time. You actually don't really have to deal with how it impacted the family, right? That's what restorative justice is about. It's about actually dealing with what happens. And what we found in restorative justice is that it's actually more work. It takes more work. It's more stressful. It's like, oh my gosh, I have to do this and I got to make amends and all these different things. So incarceration does not work, and I don't see it. I don't think that kidnapping people out of their daily lives, removing them from resources and the very things that support them and motivate them, is ever going to be an effective tool for a productive society. And in terms of the harm that has been committed as of yet, I do believe there's going to have to be a lot of reparation, right? Seriously, in many different forms. Financial, yes, but a lot, just because of what it's done to society after all these hundreds of years. But I do believe it's possible. And I believe, like anything else, when you kind of pull the Band-Aid off, it stings a little bit. But I believe much more in a system that doesn't incarcerate millions of people and hundreds of thousands of youth. There's a better way than that.
Hi, I was wondering, I really like the strategy that you mentioned to us about listening to children at school. I was wondering, what other strategies can we use to educate our children, our nieces, nephews, siblings? How can we teach them better while they are being educated in a school that instead is accommodating them to be oppressed and to continue the cycle of oppression?
I really like secondary education. So as a community, if you choose to make like an after-school program, and the good thing about now is you can usually find a little bit of grant money somewhere to do something a little different. If you're feeling like you need money, there's also private school systems, meaning that you can create, right, have like a little after-school program. Everybody pays $100. Secondary education is really, really important because of what you actually mentioned. So for me, those tools become, okay, how are we going to create spaces where we actually talk about what was learned in school, unlearn that, and then relearn what is important, right? And yes, it's more work on us, but once again, I just every time we think about more work, I just want you to consider how much more work is it to continue to live in this way, and then to recreate it ourselves. So hopefully that was a good answer. After school programs, summer programs, weekend programs, really using the community. And I think a lot of times we think, oh, I'm not going to be able to support myself, but I started doing the work I was doing for free, and I support myself now. And like I said, follow your heart. If you know for real that like what you're supposed, if you see it, it's like, okay, this is wrong, I'm gonna fix that. Then just go ahead and try to fix it. Share your ideas with other people. I think a lot of times we think that like, oh, nobody else cares about this, or nobody else is willing to do this. But a lot of the Black freedom schools, which were super, super effective, just started around the kitchen table, right? A few women coming together, talking about what they knew was better for their children, and then actually exposing them to it. So yeah, that's what I really do think. I do truly believe in secondary education as something that I experienced it in my own life through my mom and some community members, because I was going to like private schools, and they were like good for what they were, but without my secondary education, I actually don't think I would have made it through incarceration. I think it would have broke my spirit.
Thank you. And we have a few questions that I'll put together in the Zoom world here. First, what would you say is the most effective style of schooling that you've observed can truly educate and liberate youth? And how do you think we can model restorative justice and keep those who commit crimes accountable for their actions? And lastly, how can I, as a student, support my peers in helping them find their power if they're in their situation?
So to the first question, what I do is what was the most effective schooling that I've seen?
Yep.
I do believe community schools with like clear guidelines and missions tend to be the best. Smaller schools as opposed to larger schools, and schools that use indigenous practices, I think are going to be the most effective schools. And what I've seen, sorry, I'm looking at you because you have the computer. It's making me.
Represent the folks on that.
So those are the things that I think are best. I'm not going to pretend as though I like know all schools or that I've studied all of them, but what I've seen, those have been the most effective schooling methods. And then once again, schools that are very open to pushing back. But I also think, and this is something I'm learning now, that there is a financial component because we live in a capitalist society. So not be pushed back, but also be mindful of sustainability. Because what happens is that we'll create this really good idea, but we haven't figured out how to sustain it. And so being creative around how are we going to sustain the school, and then growing from there. This is my best one. And the second one is, how do we keep people who committed crimes accountable? And I guess I love this question because what I would consider is that I don't know that everyone that's committed a crime is accountable. I really don't. There's big, huge, major crimes committed on a large scale for hundreds and thousands and millions of bodies, and those people are never held accountable. So number one, I always encourage people, and that's actually from Dr. Jarvis Gibbons too. When we look at a community and we say, why is it experiencing this? Why is it experiencing that? Consider what's probably the Brofenheimer system, right? What's on the outside of that that's creating those conditions? And then in terms of holding people accountable, in the nature of Ubuntu, right? I am you because you, I am me because of you. Practicing that interconnectedness, working with each other to hold each other accountable. In the Black Panther Freedom School, they did it was like a discipline court, right? So the peers would actually hold each other accountable, and they would say, well, why didn't you show up in school today? Okay, well, this is what you got to do to figure it out. So being more in communication, but I think that this judicial system has done some very atrocious things, and I don't personally believe that it has earned the trust that organizations need to have as much power as it does. And I'd say that just considering all the people that have been wrongly convicted, just that aspect of one. And then the last question was, I apologize.
How can I, as a student, support my peers in helping them find their power in their situation if they're being subjected to these systems of incarceration and oppression?
Oh, I think that might, I don't know if that's the easiest one, but like just being, kind. Maybe me as a peer, I try to listen, and I'll be honest about me, I have a hard time like slowing down. So try to like self-awareness, checking our own biases, showing love in the ways that we know how to show love. Like we are not going to show love the same way, but being genuine about that. And we actually talked about this last week. So like a lot of self-care and self-help. I think Maya Angelou said it, you can't, it's like a naked person who gives you a shirt, it's kind of like, you're like, where'd you get that shirt from? You know what I'm saying? So being mindful of like, how do we actually put our own armor on, fortify ourselves so that we can provide to our peers, because it is hard to pour from an empty cup. So yeah.
Yeah, great, great. And before, I think this is one thing you mentioned right now about the systems and accountability. I think you pointed correctly, and think about that, reflect on that as we walk away. Not all people in the United States are held accountable, committing some of the most atrocious and crimes on the everyday, because they're not surveilled. These are the ruling classes in our society. So our system is, our criminal injustice system is very unequal. And as we've learned today, by design. And now what are we going to do to undo those systems? So let's give a big round of applause to Shani Shay. This was an amazing event and a way to end our social justice speaker series for fall. And we hope that we'll send out the note when we begin again in spring.
Thank you. That was so great. Appreciate y'all for being here with me. Thank you. Thank you. I hope I did good. That was really like one of my best ones, I think. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, that was great. Oh, yes, right.